Welcome to Energy Frontier, the Wyoming Landscape Podcast. Hosted by Dr. Holly Krutka, Executive Director of the School of Energy Resources at the University of Wyoming. The show highlights SER's role supporting our mission to promote energy-driven economic development for the state of Wyoming.
As a top oil and gas producing state, Wyoming is identifying new ways to improve and enhance oil recovery to minimize stranded, unproduced oil and gas in Wyoming fields. Our expert that we're having today on the podcast is Steve Whitaker. He's with the Enhanced Oil Recovery Institute. Steve, thank you so much for joining us. Let's start by having you tell our listeners about your background, how you came to work at the Enhanced Oil Recovery Institute, otherwise known as EORI, and your role there.
Well, yeah, thank you, Holly. And I started my career oil and gas-wise anyway back in 1978 when Texaco hired me as an exploration geologist working the Rockies, predominantly the Williston Basin back then. And Texaco in that time was one of the best places to learn. I mean, the majors in general, because they had tremendous experts that would mentor you. And Texaco had a philosophy of kind of a sink-or-swim deal, so they threw a lot of stuff at you and saw how you did it. And if you worked well and you figured things out, they'd throw more at you, give you more responsibility. So it was a really great learning process. You learned to work a lot with engineers, geophysicists, landmen, everything. Of course, back in those days, it was pre-computers, so we had to do all of our own drafting and all of our own correlations and everything. So it was kind of laborious, but you learned a lot. And so I worked there, and I really enjoyed it. And rarely I got to drill one of my prospects. I mean, usually in these major oil companies, they move so slowly. I'm going to be 10 years before you get something done. And I was lucky. I got one drilled, and it was a discovery, so that was really good. But again, it was kind of frustrating working with a company that moved so ponderously slow, even though I'm really grateful to what I was learning. So another smaller, medium, independent-sized company heard about me, and they offered me a job with a much more aggressive philosophy and more money, of course. So I said, sure. So I went to a medium-sized independent and working now the Powder River and the Williston. And now we were much more aggressive. And now I learned a whole bunch of new things because now I had to work hand in hand with a landman, not just turn it over to a landman and watch what he did. I went out on seismic crews. I talked to investors. I led field trips with the investors, showed them what we were doing. I did a lot more hands-on stuff. And again, it was a great learning opportunity. Drilled a lot of wells, made some discoveries. It was really good. But along the road there, this company made a joint venture with Amoco so that everything we did, we turned over to them, and then they would be the operator. Well, that was like working for a major again. So when another company offered me a job, a smaller company, I jumped at that because, again, it was a little bit freer.
You like to move fast.
Yeah, well, yeah. It was, you just want to get your stuff done.
Mm-hmm.
You want to see the fruits of your work. So I went with them, and that was great. That was a wonderful time. Gosh, it was just a heady time in the oil business in the early 80s and in the mid-80s. It was we were drilling, lots of new things coming up. There was lots of camaraderie. It was just a wonderful time. Well, then 85 hit and the crash in oil prices, and they were closing up shop, laying people off. I mean, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of oil workers were laid off all within a few months of one another. And the guy that ran our company, his headquarters is in Wichita, and he had family members there, so our office was sacrificed. So I joined the ranks of unemployed. So I guess you could say I was kind of a dumpy, a downly mobile professional. Major oil company, pretty big independent, small independent. Pretty soon I was out of work altogether. So a few months of that, struggled around, found some things to do, oil and gas related, still making prospects, selling them on the street, wore holes in my shoes and all that stuff. But then I heard of an opportunity at the Illinois State Geological Survey in Champaign, Illinois. And at the time, I did not even know there's oil in Illinois, but what the heck. So I applied and beat out 200 other applicants. So I moved the family over to Illinois. I did not want to get any further east than Denver, for gosh sake. So it was kind of a shift in regional interest.
And when you were working on the Williston, were you in North Dakota? And then did you come to Wyoming when you started working on the Powder River Basin?
Well, that's a good question. I skipped that. All this was out of Denver.
Okay.
I did was in the field a lot. So I was in Wyoming and in North Dakota and Montana quite a bit, but our offices were in Denver.
Got it.
So when I got shoved to Illinois, it was in a part of the country I did not really want to live. I figured, oh gosh, I'll be here for a couple of years and oil business will heal up. I'll move back to Denver. So 31 years later, I was able to move to Casper's. That's how well that plan worked. But anyway, so at the survey, it had a similar philosophy to the Enhanced Oil Recovery Institute. They were charged, the oil and gas section anyway, wasn't charged with trying to find ways to improve and maximize production for the oil operators in Illinois. So I quickly learned all about the Illinois Basin, and it was a fascinating place. It's made 4 billion barrels of oil, so it was a pretty active area. Small independents, so I helped them, did a lot of papers, started publishing, which I hadn't done before. And so I going on the lecture circuit and giving out a lot of lectures and got my name around, so it was pretty good, a lot of fun. But after a few years of this, I was realizing I was making a lot of people rich, and why don't I just follow my own advice? So I quit and formed my own company, Illinois Basin Exploration, which I called IBEX, and worked there for 16 years, where now I learned a whole new set of tools. I still published a little bit, but mostly now I had to do everything. I mean, I did the prospecting, had to seek investors, do all the accounting, go out and drill the wells, set the wells. I had a little staff, my own employees too, and I also emptied out the trash. That's how important I was. But so I was president of my own company, did that for 16 years. I owned and operated 25 oil wells, so I got to see that end of the business. So, I dealt with the regulators and the, government agencies and stuff, and really got exposed to what an independent operator has to do. Well, for years, a guy was trying to get me to sell my production to him, and I kept, no. And finally, he offered me a vice presidentship with this new company they were forming, and I'd get a piece of the action. And I thought, well, this is good, because what they were going to do is take these old fields and enhance the production and then flip them. After they got production up, they'd sell them. Price of oil was going up at the time, so I thought, well, heck, my share of this is going to be easily $2-3 million. Yeah, okay, I'll do it. Well, I'm sometimes not the sharpest tack in the box, so the condition for joining this, of course, was I had to sell them my production at a deep discount. That was kind of my way to buy into this company. So I agreed to that, and we got going. And then once they got my production set up, they did something I just had not thought of, which was they just fired me, because it was just a ruse to get my production. So, wow, that was another educational step. But right away, another company, fortunately, heard about this, and they hired me right away to be their geological manager. And there we did a lot of enhanced oil recovery, chemical flooding in the Illinois Basin, and other enhanced production, plus exploration and drilling and stuff. So I had a little staff I was in charge of there, and we did pretty good things. Had a switch in management there, so they kind of kicked out the CEO, and new guys took over who basically wanted to take credit for what everybody else had been doing, so they could give themselves some pretty good stock options and things. So they wanted to fire my staff so they could get credit. So I fought real hard for them and got really rather angry that they were trying to do this, because these guys were doing a great job. So naturally they fired me. That led me, again, as fate would have it, instead of losing faith in everything, Devon showed up on my doorstep and wanted me to work for them. So I moved to Oklahoma and now began working the Illinois Basin out of Oklahoma City. I did pretty well there, but in 2016, they decided to have massive layoffs. They bumped 1,000 of us off all on the same day. And that's when I applied to the Enhanced Oil Recovery Institute, because I saw an ad there. So I applied, and surprisingly enough, wasn't considered for the first pass. And it wasn't until they realized the people that interviewed weren't really quite the right fit, so they decided to go back through the applications and seek people. And one of the people on their search committee happened to be a guy I had mentored 20-plus years earlier in Illinois, and he called their attention to me, so they had me come in along with some others. But anyway, so I got the job there, and it's been really wonderful. It's kind of like working, again, as I said, at the Illinois State Geological Survey, but now I've learned a lot more since then, and I just really enjoy it, because you have an opportunity to help people and see how you're helping people, plus apply your knowledge to something really focused and meaningful. So that was really good. So my main jobs there are really just to mentor other people if they want to be mentored, and apply my knowledge to come up with ideas and things that the Enhanced Oil Recovery Institute, or EORI as we call it, can pursue to help the operators here in Wyoming.
And I think that's a good point, that you do get to work really closely with some of the independent, smaller operators. So you get to meet the people that you're helping and work with them directly, which is clearly very rewarding. So your story and your career path is probably not too different from a lot of people in the energy sector. And you are by training a geologist, but have worked in many different roles. So you talked about a lot of different positions you've held with different types of companies and really entities and surveys. What's your favorite aspect of working in the oil and gas industry?
Well, that's a really interesting question. I don't know there's an easy answer to that. I guess generally it is such a dynamic industry, you'd have to be a zombie to be bored here. There's just always something new, something challenging, something to learn, something to apply your knowledge to. You get to help people and do something that I think is really important. I mean, despite what the political spectrum looks like today, I mean, oil and gas are key components to our industry and our,
really to everything.
Yeah, really.
In our lives, it's used in basically everything, right. Almost everything you do, touch and see.
Basically. And so you feel like you're doing a really important job. Mm-hmm. It isn't just something meaningless. And so that's just, I think, just a big thrill. When I was drilling wells, there is nothing I ever found in my life that was as exciting and thrilling and rewarding as finding oil on somebody's property.
Yeah.
There are examples where we'd find an oil well and we're on a poor farmer's property.
Yeah.
And now we've made a huge difference. There was nothing there. We created wealth out of nothing. And that wealth not only helped the farmer save his farm, it employs people who have to watch the well, fix the well, the finances of the well. I mean, all these people are directly hired because of that. And then, of course, it goes down the road to all the people that are doing the petrochemicals and stuff. It has a little share in that too. But it's just such a fulfilling thing to do. So I guess I really like that a lot. And again, just the everyday challenges that you use your thinking to come up with. It's kind of like being a detective, where you got to search for clues and come up with a story that lets you solve a mystery. In this case, the mystery is, where is new oil or gas? Or how do I get more oil out of an existing field and save it from being plugged prematurely or something?
Right.
So it's pretty exciting.
Yeah. Well, I can just tell you, listening to you talk, that my take on your favorite aspect of working in the oil and gas industry is really working with those smaller producers and where you can see the maximum impact. So glad you found your home at EORI, even though it took you a long time to get there. In addition to doing the day-to-day work of practicing geologists, you've also found time to author several publications. You've received awards for presentations at regional, national, and international technical conferences focused on areas that you're researching. What do you find rewarding, and why do you take the time to create those publications, to attend those conferences, to participate in the awards? Why do you think all that's important?
Well, I think these conferences offer an excellent chance to present your ideas to your peers and have them present theirs to you. And there's really no substitute for that. You can't just get as much out of reading an article as actually seeing it and talking to the author or whatever and sharing your findings. I mean, a lot of times we geologists and engineers too, we people in the professional world, we work on focused research efforts. And so a lot of times that becomes kind of secretive because whatever you find out is an advantage to your company, so they want to keep it proprietary. But when you get to share that stuff with other people, they can use that knowledge to further advance that line of thinking, to modify it, to apply it to something else. Who knows what other discoveries are led by what you presented at that. And so it's a really awesome opportunity. And attending these conferences, too, is an incredible way to personally network. I mean, you never know, the network you build personally there, where these people might help you down the road in your career or in some problem you have or even your personal life. I mean, it's just a great way. And sadly, a lot of people just don't go to these conferences much anymore.
Really?
Well, yeah, it's kind of too bad. I think they think that electronic contact is as good as personal contact. It's not. The personal contact with people and the interplay personally with people is infinitely superior to texting folks and emailing and things like that.
Especially when you're talking about complicated technical topics, it's hard to sit and brainstorm over Zoom. We agree with you. And the School of Energy Resources, having our undergraduate students learn, the degree is Energy Resource Management and Development, 2 concentrations, landman and energy and environmental systems. And both of those, you have to understand contact with real humans. So we continue to teach that here.
That's good. Yeah, I think that's really important.
Good. So I noticed in your bio, you're a member of various professional organizations. For example, American Association of Petroleum Geologists, Wyoming Geologic Association. What, in your view, is the value of engaging with these types of organizations? Is there anything beyond the conferences and the peer networking? And what would you tell a young professional, maybe getting into the field, how they could benefit from these groups?
I think that's a really good question. Again, it goes back to what I was saying. I think there's no substitute for personal contact with people. And one of the best places to do that is in these conferences. So, yeah, you got the personal networking and professional networking, and that is critical. But just being able to sit down and share an idea. Some of the best ideas I saw were drawn on the back of napkins over a dinner table. And that just starts the creative juices flowing, and things evolve from that. And it's just because you start talking informally with somebody about some problem that's bothering you or something, and it just grows. And likewise, people get to understand that you are a help to them, and vice versa by these conversations. And so that would not happen were you not personally engaged with these folks. And so these conferences offer that opportunity. Of course, there's a lot of technology transfer, I should say, there, and which is always the main reason you go. But beyond that, just the personal involvement you have with this is really paramount to advancing the science of oil and gas industry or any industry. But you need to get involved. And the more people that do that, I think the better things will be. I think there's a lot of us now that see the declining enrollment in these professional organizations, declining attendance at a lot of these conferences. People tend to get siloed. They don't think broad brush anymore. They think so focused that they can't apply the fact, well, maybe what I'm doing here might apply over there.
That's what I was just thinking. You, through years and years of experience, have worked in all these different basins on different topics, everything from the technical sciences to some of the business matters. And that's expertise that a young professional, they can take decades to build it up themselves, maybe, if they have those kind of opportunities. Or you can't build it yourself, but you can build a network of people, a network of ideas that you could use in your career, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
They can act as mentors in a way. Sadly, mentoring is going a little bit by the wayside now. The rush for the unconventional world has changed the oil industry dramatically. And so a lot of these people are not being trained or mentored properly anymore because they're just run out and do his job real quick and get it done because I want this quarter's returns to look good type of thing. And a lot of these people just aren't offered the opportunity to be talking with somebody and being shown what to do. And sometimes these conferences, if you're in the right conference, can help alleviate that.
Yeah, professional organizations are really good. And, it's great to get mentorship at the company you work for. It's really important, but it's also important to have it outside of that company if you can.
Exactly. Yeah. When I was in Illinois, the governor put me on the Illinois Petroleum Resources Board, which was an organization that, for instance, tried to take care of orphaned wells in the state so the state didn't have to worry about it. So the industry was taking care of it itself, and we were in charge of making sure that got done right. We'd find the sites that needed attention, and we'd take care of it. The state would oversee what we did, have inspectors, of course, but we did all the work. And it was a really, again, a neat thing to do. Another organization that has a really defined purpose, and it's a big help. I kind of wish we do stuff like that here in Wyoming, actually.
Well, that's great. Well, maybe we'll take that as a call to action. So let's talk a little bit about some of your work at EORI. There's a lot of projects going on now. Can you give us an overview of some of the projects that you're involved with and how they would benefit Wyoming's oil and gas industry?
Sure, yeah. And there are a lot of projects going on there. I guess generally we do a lot of field studies, which involves reservoir characterization. So we do very detailed geology work and engineering work. And the reason for that is a lot of these small operators, they're in survival mode.
Right.
They don't have a large staff that is able to do a lot of this research anymore. And so we kind of supply that. So we do a lot of these reservoir studies in specific fields if those fields are applicable to other fields and other operators. So we want to make it a wide-ranging, help for people. So than just one operator to every, a lot of operators.
Because EORI is largely funded by the state. You also have some Department of Energy federal funding, but for the most part funded by the state. So your goal is to help the state, meaning you're trying to help lots of operators with your work.
Exactly. So our work has to apply to a lot of operators, not just one operator. So that's in general. Now, specifically, one of the projects we're working on right now is kind of exciting. We're trying to find ways to optimize seismic data to better define the reservoirs in the Menalusa Formation, which is one of the big conventional reservoirs in the state. It's made over 600 million barrels and probably has at least 250 million barrels left that we could recover with our current technologies. But seismic could help a lot, and it isn't being utilized much anymore.
So talk about for those not in this industry, what does that mean? Like seismic data, how is that collected and how is it used and why would it be valuable? Or what is this project exactly trying to do with it?
Yeah, and those are all good points. The seismic data is basically just you have a noise source, often dynamite is what they prefer, but they use vibro-sized trucks, whatever, some noise source at the surface. You have all these geophones planted out, which are basically like microphones, very sensitive microphones. And when they shoot a charge or make noise at the surface, the sound waves penetrate the earth and bounce off different rock horizons down there and reflect back. And based on the type of reflection that comes back, you can tell what type of rock it is, what orientation it is, and if you got really good data, you can even tell whether it's a good reservoir or bad reservoir. That gets pretty tricky, but generally it's a way to see underground in much better detail than you could with just scattered well control. So we have to use seismic data a lot to see more detail than we could with the scattered wells. You have a well maybe one every 10 acres if you're inside a field, sometimes one per square mile or even less if you're out exploring. Well, that doesn't give you anywhere near as clear a picture as you need in order to say, well, here's where I want to drill. Here's an X on the map. So we use seismic data a lot. Now, the seismic data that's been used in Wyoming has been, processed basically the same way we've been processing it for the last many decades. And what's happened here a lot of times is, since the big companies, the majors have pulled out, a lot of the innovation went with them.
Yeah.
And so people doing things the way we've done them before, and that works okay, but there's an old adage, if you do what you've always done, you're going to get what you've always gotten. So if you're trying to do something new, you got to change up what you're doing. So what we're trying to do is see if we can tune the seismic processing such that it is better able to see these very complex reservoirs in the Menalusa. The Menalusa, for those who don't know, is kind of comprises basically old ancient sand dunes that were blown into a shallow sea that was here about 280 million years ago or so. And the oil is trapped inside these dunes, providing you got a trap there. But the seismic data hopefully can see that, and it has been frequently not able to see it. It sees some of them, but misses some. And so we're thinking we can find ways to process the data better just so that we can see it much more clearly. Therefore, people can find more Menalusa fields, but also even in the existing Menalusa fields, find places where I could have drilled over here. Here's a spot I can drill over here. Oh, look, this field's bigger than I thought or whatever. So again, ways to improve production and help lots of operators who are involved with that play. So that's one project we're doing. Another one is involving various operators that are injecting different kinds of fluids into the reservoirs, the existing reservoirs, to try and improve production. One of the fluids they're trying is natural gas liquids, which is a solvent. It hasn't been done before, primarily because it's expensive. But NGLs are cheaper now than they have been for a while, and the technology is a bit better, so they're going to give it a try. And if that works, then we can apply that to an awful lot of fields around Wyoming. Another outfit is trying to put in carbon dioxide into Menalusa. It hasn't been done much before because the Menalusa fields are too small by themselves to justify the horrific expense to bring CO2 in there and put it in the ground. But he's stringing 3 fields together and has already worked out a deal with the CO2 supplier, in this case Exxon, to get this thing going. So we're really excited about that.
And let's just break that down. So the idea you're talking about is CO2 enhanced oil recovery. And just talk about how does that work? Like what's happening?
Well, in a real
high level.
Yeah, real high level sense, the CO2 can kind of mix with the oil and it acts as a kind of a solvent. It also, since it's a gas, it pressures up the reservoir. Because a lot of the problem we have in these old reservoirs is we drive the pressure down to where it's very hard to get the oil out anymore. So you got to repressurize it. They often do that by pushing water in the ground. But that only sweeps so much of the oil. The carbon dioxide will capture more of the oil that's been missed by the water. And so that's the primary reason to use CO2. It's been proven to work very well. It's just expensive to do it, but it works very well. And so this idea of stringing several fields together in order to justify a pipeline makes a lot of sense. So if this works again, we can apply that to a lot of other fields in the basin perhaps. Another operator is going to put down what they call enriched air, which is basically going to be pumping down this air with more oxygen in it and start an in situ kind of a fire, in essence, down in the oil field. That will heat up the oil, which will increase the pressure, but also make it more liquid, and it will be easier to flow to the producing wells. So that's another scheme they're trying, and if that works, again, that has huge applications.
Yep.
Another folks are going to be trying a chemical flood with a cocktail of alkaline surfactant polymer. The polymer kind of redirects the water. The alkali helps the surfactant kind of dissolve the oil better. It's kind of like putting Dawn dish soap down there, except Dawn, you can't afford to put Dawn down there. So this alkali combined with surfactant with the polymer helps direct the water that you're putting into the ground into parts of the field that have been missed before.
Yeah.
So they think they've developed a cocktail which will be very, very good in the Menalusa. So they're going to try that. And if that works, again, we apply that to a lot of Menalusa fields. For those fields, for instance, we can't afford to do CO2 flooding in or something.
That's a really good description of quite a few very different projects that EORI is working on now.
And that doesn't count the DOE ones.
Right.
We have the Department of Energy has co-funded a couple.
Talk about the process of coming up with ideas for new projects. How do you evaluate them? Where do the ideas come from? There's probably a mix of approaches.
That calls for a lot of just creative thinking. Geologists, good oil and gas geologists and engineers kind of have to see in not just 3 dimensions, really, but sometimes 4 dimensions because things change through time. And if you have a pretty wide band of experience, you come up with ideas. Since, for instance, I was an operator myself, I know what I would have liked to have seen if somebody's going to help me. And so that plays into my mind now. I can identify with some of the problems the operators are facing, and I think, well, here's an issue that might help them. I mean, for instance, the seismic data. I've been hoping that we get EORI involved with seismic for a long time. Haven't really had the opportunity until recently, so we jumped on that. But, again, lots of things, better reservoir characterization, different ways to do polymer floods, lots of different factors that go into just improving recovery that ideally don't cost a lot of money. And a lot of things can recover oil, but you go bankrupt doing it. It does you no good if you lose money. You're really in the money-making process, not just the oil-making. If you lose money making oil, you're going to go bankrupt.
Since you primarily work with smaller producers, probably what is feasible for them to implement is different than large corporate organizations.
Absolutely. Yeah, you have to be very cognizant of the economics of the situation. Again, a lot of these companies, they are hard-working folks, but they don't have the financial wherewithal to do a lot of these big projects. So we have to find ways to do scaled economic projects that they can feasibly do that improves or enhances their recovery in their existing fields. And that saves a lot of production, again, revenue to the state too. So
no, that's what I was going to say. That's one of the reasons this is so beneficial to Wyoming is because you're helping the folks who don't have, at least as individuals or as individual companies, they don't have the financial backing to take on some of this research or really the resources. They don't have the people. They don't need full-time researchers. So that's why there's such a big benefit to the state.
That's exactly right. I was talking to an operator just this last week, matter of fact, who was saying that they have to spend all of their time dealing with the regulatory issues and plugging old wells. They have no time to do any exploration and no time to do reservoir characterization. They don't have the staff to do it. They have no time to do that. So they can't really launch effective enhanced or improved oil recovery programs unless somebody helps them. That's where the Enhanced Oil Recovery Institute comes in. We will be their research arm, as it were. And again, we can help lots of operators if we pick the right topics. So we have to be very careful. We're picking projects that are applicable to a wide range of operators. And that way we get a lot more bang for a buck.
Great. And so that's kind of how you're judging these new projects is, are they going to help the most operators covering the most oil production in the state?
Right. Exactly. Yeah, exactly. We want to get stuff that makes a significant impact, not just in oil produced, but in operators that can use the new technology, right?
Yeah. And so can you give an example of a concept you find interesting? You already talked about the seismic, and I have to say kudos. That was the best explanation of seismic data from a non-geologist that I've ever heard. So thank you so much for giving that. So is there any other topics that you find interesting and you plan to work on in the future?
Oh, yeah. Well, there's no shortage. I probably have in my head enough ideas to keep us busy for the next decade. I mean, next century probably. But
what's your favorite?
Well, I guess I can't really pick a favorite. There are so many issues. Somebody will have a major issue, and the issues change depending on politics or climate or economy or whatever. I mean, just for instance, here's an issue. Utility costs are really hurting these operators because electrical costs are going up and up and up. Well, your production's not going up. Your electrical cost to pump the wells goes up, so obviously you have to plug your well out sooner. So, okay, is there a way we can find a way to better manage utility costs? I mean, that's not just an EORI project. That would be a multidisciplinary effort.
Sure.
But that would be something the state probably needs to attack because the state has a vested interest in this. If these fields are prematurely plugged and they lose all that production, that means the state uses future tax revenue, which we sorely need.
Right.
Another problem is a lot of these fields make a lot of water and they get basically water constrained. You can't get rid of any more than X barrels of water. But they know there's a lot more oil in there, but they can't make more oil because they make more water. So are there ways to treat the water or deal with the water or not produce as much water so that you can produce more oil and deal with the water? And some of that, there are various ways you can do that. You can find water treatment systems. You can use polymer that deflects the water so you're not making so much water to begin with. You can recomplete wells. You can plug some wells, drill new ones. I mean, there are lots of ways to do this, but those are other aspects, for instance, we can tackle. But again, I could go down a whole litany of lists of just things that would do marvels, I think, for these operators just to increase the length of time that they can produce these fields.
And I will say, we really appreciate our working relationship with EORI because you can help inform what we're doing here at the University of Wyoming and the School of Energy Resources. I think you probably know we have a Center for Produced Water Management trying to figure out new technologies to tackle these very issues, focus on Wyoming's produced water, but getting real-time feedback on the challenges, the water quality, and just having partners to engage with is so valuable. So totally agree.
Exactly. Yeah, working with SER is really a huge benefit. I mean, University of Wyoming has a lot of assets that the operators don't normally think about because, again, unfortunately, University of Wyoming is in the extreme southern end of the state, and most of the production in the state is on the northern side, and they just don't come down to Laramie, so they don't really understand what's available. So we help liaise a little bit there.
You sure do.
That's a big help.
So ensuring we maintain a strong oil and gas industry in Wyoming is really important to the state for a lot of reasons that we've already talked about. The industry is facing a lot of challenges: logistical, technical, economic, political, regulatory. You've talked about some of those challenges. Is there anything else that we haven't talked about that you think is important and that could impact the state and its oil and gas producers?
Oh yeah, they're thought a little bit about it. Probably come up with a lot of other items. But I mean, one thing comes to mind, for instance, is we can't do anything about the weather, and the climate here. That's just the way it is. We can't do anything about it's cold and
windy.
Shuts things down. Yeah, and we can't do anything about what the feds do. But the state can maybe, for instance, encourage people to come into this state and improve production in these old fields. Wyoming has one of the, if not the highest taxes on oil income of any state in the United States. And so that's obviously a deterrent. And people still come here because there's a lot of oil to be found. It is a deterrent. And coupled with the bad weather and dealing with the fact that Wyoming has more federal acreage in oil productive areas than any state in the country also. So that presents another wrinkle.
Right. And for those not familiar, most people listening to this podcast probably have. And we've talked about the challenges with energy development on federal lands, even related to other energy sources like wind. But oil and gas, it is more challenging, and it's getting more challenging, and the costs are going up. So even outside of the state's control, a lot of our oil and gas is on federal lands.
Right. And it's nothing the state can do about that.
Right.
And so you have to live with that. So how else can you bring people in? So if I'm an operator in Houston, I want to come to Wyoming, why would I come to Wyoming if I see all this federal acreage? Okay, it's got a high tax structure. Why would I want to come here? Well, it's got a lot of oil. Okay, but I lose a lot of it through taxes. So why would I come here? Well,
and we're farther from markets.
And that too. And so our oil prices are lower than some other areas. That's another issue.
What people get paid.
Yes, what they get paid for the oil. It is not what you see. The West Texas Intermediate is not the price that we get here in Wyoming. And there's another problem. Of course, we get different prices in Wyoming depending where you are. So, that's another complex issue. But the state could do things perhaps to encourage folks to come in, as I said, to try and resurrect these old fields. But one of those things might be, is there some type of a tax break they could do? If you're going to do secondary, tertiary recovery, we will reduce your taxes this much to help you out, because whatever you're doing is going to be really expensive. Another thing they might consider doing, I mentioned this before, is right now, if you're an operator, you come in, you have to pay a lot in idle well bond fees because you have wells that aren't producing. So you pay a lot of bond fees. Well, other states have dealt with this issue because what you're afraid of is orphan wells. If somebody walks away and leaves an oil well, the state winds up having to plug that thing. Well, that isn't good for the state. So we want to ensure that doesn't happen. Well, again, the Oklahoma Energy Resources Board and the Illinois Petroleum Resources Board have both developed procedures where they will take over through industry donations. They will take over that responsibility so the state doesn't have to fund any of that. And maybe the state could have some conversations with the OERB or the IPRB and see if there's a way to work with industry here and get that started, because that would free up a huge amount of capital, which then could be used to do enhanced or improved oil recovery or look for more oil. But either way, produce more oil, which would be benefit to the state because we're going to make more tax revenue.
Sure.
So those are a couple of things.
It is exciting the state has been looking at some innovative ideas. Just for one, it didn't pass in the last legislative session, but let's see where it goes, is the idea of kind of leveling the playing field for 45Q tax credits so that in Wyoming, the 45Q tax credits, it's a tax credit that you can get from the feds to store CO2 in the subsurface. You can either store it or you can store it through use in enhanced oil recovery, and the state's going to get a lot more benefit if we use it for oil. But the feds have put more value on the credit if you just store it without doing any extra oil production. So the state is looking at how can we as a state, put our thumb on the scale and prioritize enhanced oil recovery. So there's definitely interest. And I think one of the things that we totally hear what you're saying, and this is a great example of where we're going to need a multidisciplinary team to look at this, because these are really broad questions. Like, what can we do in Wyoming to make it more attractive to invest in oil and gas production here? So one of the things we're leading off, and of course EORI is a great partner on this, and we're just about to kick off this work now. By the time this podcast airs, it will be totally underway, is a cost structure study and understanding what, you talked about taxes, but how much of those are making up our costs? How much is it electricity? How much is it dealing with produced water? And I think we'll have to break out like federal and non-federal lands to understand those both, so that, we're really armed with some great data, and we can use that to try to start picking away at those costs and understand really the idea behind that project is like, give us a roadmap here at the School of Energy Resources, and also you maybe at EORI, what can we work on? And we'll know what's the most important. And some things we don't have control of, but a lot of it we can impact. So grateful for you all being our partners in that as we get that kicked off. So is there anything else you want to talk about that is related to these projects or your job at EORI, or would it be a good time to let our listeners learn a little bit more about you?
Oh, they don't need to learn much about me.
No, they're going to. We're going to learn about you. So what is your favorite place to visit in Wyoming?
Oh, gosh. Well, Wyoming's got so many beautiful places. And I got to say really fairly, I don't have a favorite place. First of all, I haven't visited every place yet. But
well, that's a good point.
I guess, differently worded, I have not found any place in Wyoming I don't like. Mm-hmm. Every place has something charming about it. I mean, some places are spectacular.
Yeah.
I haven't been able to get deep back into the Wind River Basin, in Wind River Mountains yet. And that would be kind of interesting, providing I can bear-proof myself.
Yeah.
But there's so many places that are so fascinating, and it's just got such a rich geological history, and plus just human history too. I just find a lot of it fascinating. Even the human part, where the Paleo Indians were, where the cattlemen were, where just all that's fascinating. So I find going down to Guernsey and looking at the old wagon ruts, that's just amazing to me. All that stuff. So I find Wyoming overall just a really great place. Plus, I guess one of the biggest things overall I enjoy about Wyoming is it isn't totally crowded with people, with the exception of Yellowstone. But it is a fantastic place to just go out and enjoy nature the way it's supposed to be, without having to share it with 55,000 other people with their ATVs and motorcycles and RVs and stuff. It's just wonderful. So I really, really like that part about Wyoming.
Slower pace of life.
Yeah,
because of that,
and maybe a bit more appreciative pace. I mean, you don't take as many things for granted here. Mm-hmm. I think as a lot of people do in the city areas, they think. There's chicken on the table, but they don't like you to kill chickens. Well, but you eat chicken. I mean, just there's things taken for granted. There's no long-term thinking, I think, with a lot of these things. But Wyoming seems to be a little bit different. I think people are more hands-on here. So I think they understand how things work perhaps a little bit better, because there aren't as many of us to take things for granted.
Right. Yeah. Well, Steve, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you so much for engaging with the School of Energy Resources, for all your hard work at the Enhanced Oil Recovery Institute, and being here in Wyoming. And thanks for sharing a little bit of your time to help our listeners learn about what you're doing here.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Glad that you had me. It's fun. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Energy Frontier, the Wyoming Landscape, the podcast that highlights the School of Energy Resources at the University of Wyoming. You can expect a new episode of Energy Frontier every Wednesday on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. See you next time.